Welcome to the HerHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk, where we empower women and girls to take charge of their health and well-being. Join us as we shine a spotlight on issues affecting women and girls' health and explore ways to create positive change. Get ready to be inspired and empowered as we discuss health, advocacy, and empowerment for women and girls at risk. Please be advised that this podcast may cover sensitive topics such as gendered violence. We understand that these discussions can be difficult to listen to. If you feel uncomfortable or need support, we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Consider exploring our other podcasts if these topics are triggering for you. Resources can be found in the description.
So hi everyone, welcome back to the Her Health podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Lazoshek, and today we're joined by Carrie Low, a sexual assault survivor, activist, and one of the most tenacious advocates for survivors' rights in the Canadian criminal justice system. Carrie is the founder of Survivors for Change and Empowerment in Nova Scotia, and her story is documented in the CBC investigative podcast, Carrie Low Versus. In early 2002, she co-founded My Voice, My Choice, a national survivor-led initiative whose advocacy directly contributed to the passage of Bill S-12, a landmark reforms to publication ban laws under the criminal code that give survivors back control over their own names and stories. And I can't wait to discuss about that further. And today's conversation builds on her webinar, Survivors' Rights in the Criminal Justice System, Reclaiming Power, Demanding Change. And we're going to talk about the gap between survivors' rights on papers and the reality that many survivors face, and it isn't mentioned very often. So I'm glad to have this conversation today. And more discussing about transformative survivor-led change actually looks like. So yes, thank you so much for joining me today, Carrie. I truly appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to having this discussion.
Yay. So jumping right ahead, your webinar talks about the gap between survivors' rights on paper and the reality of systemic injustice. And in your experience and in your work with other survivors, what does that gap look like in practice?
Yeah, so again, when I talked about it just now in the presentation is I say it. We do have Victim Bill of Rights, but these are just rights on paper. There is no accountability process. There is no real system where if a survivor is not having their rights met, that they can make a true there are complaint processes that exist, but not to the extent that really should be. So for example, we have and the wording in it. And I think that's also really important to mention because I mentioned in my presentation, I said, it wasn't until 2 years later that I even knew these existed. My lawyers didn't, even mention to me victim services. Nobody had told me about a Bill of Rights. And somehow in passing, I had heard the term and I'm like, oh, something I need to learn. And I'm, looking up these rights. And I think what's important is post that and getting into the advocacy work. I remember multiple survivors, like, my rights were violated. Like we have a Victim Bill of Rights and, I wasn't given this and this didn't happen. And you know what? You should be upset about that. That is true. But what most people don't understand is that these aren't enforceable, right? They're there, they're I call them like lip service on paper, you know? And I think the other problem with the rights is defining how they're defined. So in the Victim Bill of Rights, it says that you have the right on request to information. That is a key language in the wording of the act, because it doesn't say that you have the right, like you're automatically going to get this. So you have the right to request it. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it's up to you to request it at the end of the day. So there is no accountability piece where, your victim services worker should be giving you A, B, C, or D. That's really important to note. And, I think that gets missed a lot within that. Then there's, multiple things like you have rights, but how far do you get those rights? Someone as a survivor, and as we know, excuse me, with our statistics, that the numbers are extremely low of conviction rates on sexual assault cases. So oftentimes we're going through these processes for years, right? 5 years I went through the criminal justice system, and ending in a an acquittal. That's where the buck stops. So all of that was done to me over 5 years. Don't get restitution. I don't get any sort of, um, remuneration for wages lost, going through this process, or medical expenses and whatnot. So again, I think it's another harm at the end of the day that oftentimes, I used to always say to survivors I work with, I'm going to be that barrier of bad news.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I'm glad it's me telling you and not the system. So I think that was really hard in this advocacy work was, uh, seeing survivors come in, like, I heard your case, this happened to me, I have these rights, and then letting them know, yeah, you do on paper, but you really don't have the rights. And I want to just further add to that piece is, like I mentioned, these are federal Bill of Rights. Each province has its own Bill of Rights or some sort of, um, you know, policy when it comes to victim services and sharing information and that kind of thing. And these preceded, the Victim Bill of Rights. So oftentimes, they go by their own Victim Bill of Rights, not the Canada Victim Bill of Rights. And if your rights are violated, you do have the right to complain. But this is where people think that you can just, fill out a form and complain. It doesn't work like that. Excuse me. So, for instance, I made a complaint about the police. I had that right. They weren't giving me information. It's in the Victim Bill of Rights. You have the right to information on the investigation, updates and that. So, for me to file a complaint, I have to go through the police complaints process, right? And
Mhm.
again, that is no easy feat, because you're going through a process where, most survivors that I know, myself included, thank God, I did have some pro bono lawyers that did work for me over the years, but you're going into these processes with no assistance. Most people
Mhm.
can't hire a lawyer, you know. If you even do get to a point in the complaint process where and we see these in the statistics, I'm not just making it up, but so many times your complaint is, oh, officer did no wrong,
Mhm.
Crown, there is a process to file complaints with, they follow procedures. There isn't, because there's no really weight to those rights as well. But, you know, um, no, they did, everything okay. So then your complaint is turned back to you, no finding. And then it's like, okay, well, what do I do? I can appeal it. And then if you appeal it, then you're into even a bigger, system. And again, this is where it gets so difficult and opaque. It's a maze of a system. You don't know how it works. Nobody even follows their system. Um, I remember when I first filed that police complaint, I did two processes and they were different, RCMP and municipal police. RCMP was a much, easier, simplified system. HRP was not. And, I again had to fight them just to hear my complaint. But now that I'm in it, I'm now appealing it because I didn't like their decision. And this is, I think, is important. A lot of folks don't know about. This happens a lot in policing when you make complaints. Is, they'll take your information. Sometimes you'll get a chance to sit down and actually do an interview with them, but most times you don't because it's in your complaint. So they're going to do their behind the scenes investigation. And the first thing they're going to offer to you is what's called an informal resolution. And I remember being like, how is this part of a process if I don't even know what your findings were? And they don't have to share it, right? They don't have to share it. The police officer you're complaining about doesn't even have to be a part of the process if they don't want to. So there's a lot of constraints around this. And again, I'll try to move quickly, but you know, and I couldn't. There's no way. Like I can't. How can someone say, okay, I'll do an informal process without knowing what your findings were? And what usually happens in an informal process is you can say, okay, well, I want the officer to apologize, or I want him to take more training in this, or he needs operational guidance. So you can ask, but it doesn't mean that they're going to accept it, right?
Mhm.
And then you start into the bigger things, and then it's I went through a police review board hearing. I mean, yes, my case was huge, and a lot of things came out in that, but here you are again. Most people who even I know people who have gone through that process, that appeal process, had a review board hearing and represented themselves, and you're up against a panel, of three people. Most times have a background in law. You're up against a police officer who has a paid lawyer, and usually a
Mhm.
really good lawyer. So it's not something. It doesn't afford justice at all. It's certainly not accessible to civilians, and yeah. So I think again, there's where a gap lies.
Mhm.
You know, for anybody who wants to make a complaint, and the information, there's no knowledge about that, right? We're not
Mhm.
told that. And I will add one thing, because I don't know if it was ever mentioned even in the podcast, but I remember before I met the executive director, Elizabeth Fry, and the victim services worker. And I remember she told me, she did tell me, she's like, Carrie, you can make a police complaint, but she warned me not to, right? I will warn
Mhm.
you, it's very well known in the culture here, if you make a complaint about police, that they will, you know, flag you, and you're a troublemaker, and not really investigate your case. So yeah, so it's not, easy to do. It's not straightforward. Um, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit ironic that it's called the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights, and it should have all the information, protection, participation, and restitutions. But in everyday experiences, those rights aren't fully realized, or aren't the experiences of individuals that are survivors. And it's just a shame that both legal systems, nonprofit community settings don't have the accountability structures, but that's also due to other barriers, specifically in community settings like capacity and whatnot,
Yep.
but that they don't have all the information to inform survivors, all the steps and information needed to pursue legal justice, if
Hmm.
that is desired, and which could save headaches, especially like because it is so jarring, and that miscommunication can take years, and it can
Hmm.
be very, yeah, just to know about one's survivor's rights. And I think it lends itself
Yeah.
very naturally into something that we hear often from survivors when these gaps do show up, is that you mentioned in your webinar reporting to re-traumatization.
Mm.
And some of the concrete examples that you gave us was like missed evidence, the recognized harm without naming it, or delays, or not being told what's actually happening. And I guess my question for you is that, oh, take your time. Okay,
Sorry,
you're muted.
go
Oh,
ahead.
no, I want to make sure you're okay.
Yep.
The phrase re-traumatization comes a lot up in this space. And
Hmm.
can you describe what re-traumatization by the system looks and feels like?
Yeah. So there's kind of two parts to this, because there's re-traumatization and there's institutional betrayal. And they can be one of, they intersect, they're, part of, but re-traumatization is, you've already experienced harm. You've told your story. Now you're in the system. And re-traumatization is having to go over your story again multiple times, having to tell my story 4 times. What was re-traumatizing to me, you know, um, even though before the officer came out, the whistleblower, a year later, to tell me that they didn't believe me, I didn't feel believed, because their actions weren't matching up, right? They weren't going to the scene. They weren't. Then it's also having to call all the time, not getting follow-ups, asking, like we talk about the Victim Bill of Rights, you've got to ask for information. That is re-traumatizing because we as survivors have, gone through one of the most horrific traumas that we're ever going to face in our lifetime. And we need time to heal from that. And we don't get the time, especially if you've reported right away. you know so I have gone through therapy all this time, and I haven't even gotten to the stage to work on what happened to me that night, because I am still living with the trauma that has been put on me from the system over and over. And I had to quit my job in the first 3 months. Yes, some of it was contributed to the harms and then the manifestations of the symptoms of that, but it was more so because I then was literally investigating my own case, and it was a full-time job, calling, asking, what's going on, being kept in the dark. So re-traumatization, it is that it's going through a system where you're not seen as a human. You don't have rights. You are not, and I talk about this, I have talked about this in the past, and this is something that, within my healing have tried to identify with. And it's really hard to explain to another person until you've gone in it. But I remember moving through the system and trying to understand again, like I'm the one who was harmed, but the crown doesn't work for me, and they're adamant about that. Like, we're not your lawyer, we don't work for you. You are told you're a witness, you're just a witness. So for me, that was re-traumatizing to know that the crown is telling me, well, we don't work for you, we work for the state, so the public good. So I'm just a witness and a piece of evidence. I'm not part of the public good. Like there to me, there was this disconnect, and it really, it's hard to identify with. I really felt, am I not human? Am I not worthy to be included in this, space? That's hard. Again, it's, I talked about in the Q&A just now, sorry, in the Q&A about, your consent was taken from you, right? And then you're now in a system where you have no choice. It's very paternalistic. People are coming in and telling you what's going to happen, not asking you. You are not part of that process. We do have, somewhat of these rights where, and people will say like, oh, well, I didn't want them to take a plea deal. Like, why were they offered a plea deal? Why didn't I get to say anything? You have the right to voice your opinion, but it doesn't mean they're going to take it. So again, it's like that continuing re-victimization of, you don't have autonomy. You don't have a choice. And again, it's other people acting for you. And that can be difficult. And excuse me, and not only of the trauma of what you experienced, you're now, for me especially, was the ongoing harms of that system and having those things taken from me, which exasperated, all of those manifestations, symptoms that I was experiencing. I'm sorry.
No, okay.
I'm losing my voice. And that's difficult. And not being believed. Survivors who are not believed, it's a level of, can we continue, or should I
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
rambling?
so
Because we're going to talk a little bit about institutional harm. And I think that's important because it took a long time for me to identify with institutional harm. Even if, let's say we don't know. I know my case is unique. Yes, we had a whistleblower come forward and tell me I wasn't believed. But that was hard, But when a survivor goes through, no charges get laid or the charges get dropped. Like, I remember after my third interview, and I talk about this in the podcast, like, or the second interview, I think, do they believe me? Like, why are they continuously asking me about what happened to me over and over again? Like, why are they doing this? Do they not believe me? That starts creating, I'll be frank about the symptoms that I experience. It starts creating a lot of you know, craziness. Like, am I like, is this my reality? Is this real? And I think, you know, if you work in this work, you know about coercive control and you know, and I call it, I call the legal system like being in an abusive relationship, you know, the gaslighting, you know, so all of these things are exasperated and, you know, then being told that you're not believed, um, and having to go through all of these systems trying to get accountability, you know. And for me it wasn't like, I'm, you know, that one officer, you better, you know, I want you in trouble. It was systematic. It's a system problem. I wanted it, you know. I complained about the whole department, right? Not just one officer. And then to sit there, you know, through the police review board even, and watch these officers testify on the stand and completely lie. Like, so when you develop institutional harm, you know, from not being believed, or these processes not, um, you know, being, I guess, fruitful or moving through the system where you may get some type of conclusion, creates a distrust. And, you know, I remember hearing about this and, you know, reading about institutional harm and really not identifying with it. Because when I first was exposed to it, it was like, you know, typically people who have been, you know, subjected to sexual violence or sexual abuse in a, you know, by a system, whether it's, you know, child protection or universities or, you know, that kind of thing. But I experienced it from the police, you know, and the system. And it's a level of distrust that is so profound, it changes everything about you. And it erodes all trust in all systems. And not only that, it starts eroding trust within your interpersonal relationships. And you know, I remember manifesting in ways like at one point, like I didn't even think my kids, like I thought my kids were against me. Like there's a lot of harm that really can be done, you know, from re-victimization, but also institutional betrayal. And I talked about continuous, you know, stress, because we talk a lot about PTSD. We talk a lot about complex, you know, but continuous stress, it's not, I don't think it's in the DSM, but, you know, the coin was turned in the 80s based on state harm, right? That people are experiencing, especially in war-torn countries. And,
Mhm.
you know, especially in a case like mine, where it was every day dealing with all of these harms from the state and not being accountable, just continuously living in a state of fear, to the point where like I'm isolating, like I don't leave. I still to this day go through episodes of isolation. I can't leave my house. I'm in fear. I'm in fear of
Mhm.
police retaliation, right? We hear it a lot. We had the mass casualty situation here. You know, he was a police informant. We had, you know, a lot of stuff came out in my case as well. And so it's not just a buzzword; it's a
Mhm.
reality. And on top of that reality is what people don't understand is we don't get help, right? We are not afforded, you know, psychologists and you know,
Mhm.
therapy and you know, that's all on us. And a lot of the times we don't have that. A lot of the times we can't work. So it's just like compounding after compounding
Yeah.
after compounding, re-traumatization, and institutional betrayal, that can exist, and does exist, and isn't talked about enough, you know,
Mhm.
isn't talked about enough in the system. Yeah. Or understood enough. I don't think, especially by those who are in it, you know?
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to your personal experiences. And it's just so beautifully said. And that many survivors feel like they're not seen or heard or believed. And that system does re traumatize people when you aren't believed. And that lack of trauma informed care throughout the systems should be there to folks who deserve it the most, the people that lack choice that happened to them. So when they
Yeah,
have no choice or autonomy in the system, it's just that re-traumatization, and there's no room for healing if you feel like you're having a transgression towards
that's
you
right.
every step of the way. And I did really appreciate you discussing the biopsychosocial negative impacts that the
Yeah,
survivor does experience, especially when going through a very precarious system. So thank you so much for really diving into that.
yeah,
I
thank you.
really, of course, and I really want to learn more about publication bans and like your just like my voice, my choice. So just let me
Can
know
I?
if my background knowledge.
Yeah,
Yes, go ahead.
we can. I just, because you said trauma informed care, and I just want to add this plug in because this is something I as well learned. You know, uh, definitely trauma informed. I think we even push it further. We need more trauma and violence informed spaces and approaches and practices. But one thing I did want to mention is, far too often, sometimes it can be this buzzword, especially in these systems, right? Like, oh, we have trauma-informed trained officers, or oh, we're a trauma-informed, health system. But yet when you're in the system, you're like, I don't feel like this is a trauma-informed approach. So I want to say this is at the end of the day, we can take all the training. I've had training, right? But I can't claim to be a trauma-informed expert because at the end of the day, that person that you are servicing, they decide whether or not they're receiving trauma-informed care or approaches. And I really wanted to highlight that because I feel like I've noticed it far too often in these spaces that, like, oh, our organization's trauma-informed, but are you really? Right? So I did want to add that, and check in with the people that you're working with. Like, I think that's important as well. I think I wish a lot of people would ask me more, like, you know, yeah, I just wanted to add that. And let's get into
No,
pub bands.
definitely. But yes, we'll definitely get into that shift of survivor centered to survivor led. I think that fits really perfectly into what you just mentioned about trauma informed care and how the personal lived experiences are actually guiding the way in which we do our work every day. So, yes, public bans. I want to learn more. So let me know if my
Yeah.
information that I pulled is wrong. So historically,
Okay.
Canadian publication bans automatically bar the media and like public information from identifying victims of sexual offenses.
Yeah.
But you discovered in 2021 that a publication ban had been placed on your name without your knowledge or consent. And you had to go to the court and hire a lawyer to uplift it. Just another process that we discussed is just ridiculous.
Right.
Can you explain how that happened and why that
Yeah.
experience led you to co-found My Voice, My Choice?
Yeah. So do you want me to go how I found out about the band?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Just what the publication ban is and
Yep.
what everything that went
So,
wrong.
well, I didn't even know what it was when I found out it was on me. So I will say this. So, um, yes, historically, what was happening is, I what has been a while since I advocated for pub ban, so I'm not going to throw out what year it was, but a number of years ago, um, you know, advocates, survivors, victims, they advocated for this, and I agree. Publication bans are very important because years ago there wasn't any. So a victim survivor going through the system, the media could publish their name. Sensitive details. It's very private. It's as we know, there's a lot of rape myths and shame and around that stuff. So it was put in place to protect. And the idea was, when it was first enacted, that yes, you have the choice. You had the choice if you wanted your name to be private and not publicized. But what had been happening, and especially as we see what's going through our courts right now, is courts are started getting backed up. And this is sort of like the only way that I've been able to sort of come to terms with, and hearing from Crown prosecutors that develop sort of this policy within their departments where at that first court appearance, they're putting on publication bans. I'll even take it a step further where post all these processes with the police complaint process, I able was to get my police file. There's also a form that the police fill in when they're sending disclosure packages. So they've laid charges, they send a disclosure package to the Crown, here's charges. In that there's actually a form that they check, like publication ban, yes or no. So the police were doing it as well. Police were checking that off, but they weren't asking, whether or not I wanted one. So again, the idea behind a publication ban is to protect the identity of the complainant if that complainant wants it. Okay. But again, these were being automatically put on survivors. Not only were they automatically put on survivors, survivors didn't know they existed. Right. So Kelly Favreau, you know, her and Morel Andrews, Kelly Favreau, she talks about her story very publicly. You know, I think it was 5 years after her case, you know, and she tried to look up her case. She couldn't find it. That's when she found out 5 years after her trial was done and over with, you know, and they stay on life. So all these publication bans get put on you. It protects your identity. What that means is the media cannot publicly report on the case. So as it's going through, court reporters writing it in the public, they cannot identify you. The other thing is if, you know, I don't know, nobody else can identify you. It's quote unquote a breach of a publication ban. You as the victim complainant, and I'll use the term I because, you know, it was put on me. So I couldn't talk about it. I was legally bound not to identify myself with this case. Therefore, I could no longer be public. Or if I did, I could be liable for a charge. And that charge would include a fine up to $5,000 and up to 2 years imprisonment. Amazing, right? Because that's more than what, you know, predators usually get when they are convicted. So that was the penalty for breaking a publication ban. So not only were you not aware of it, you weren't told it existed. Therefore, you didn't know what the terms were. So you now have a, you know, a legal document, you know, that says you cannot do something and you're not even exposed to it. So again, I wasn't aware of my publication ban. I had already been public in the legal system. You know, 2 years before you know, my case moved through the system. And I was working on a podcast with CBC about my story and all the systemic failures that I was facing with policing. And, you know, I remember working with a reporter, and I remember Maggie saying to me, you know, like there will be a point where the Crown will ask you if you want a publication ban, because she like reporters know sexual assault cases look for a publication ban because they can't report on it. So again, she's doing her work. She called multiple times to the courthouse. They're like, yeah, we don't see a publication ban. So fast forward, we're doing this, you know, leading 2 months leading into, I know when the podcast is going to come out, and I'm meeting with the Crown, and I want to be transparent with the Crown that I'm doing this podcast. So I met with the Crown. I tell them, you know, my lawyer was with me. I had legal representation then, so my lawyer's with me, and I disclosed to the Crown, like, I'm doing this podcast with CBC, wanting to be transparent with you. My case is now going through the system. Do you have any feedback, or do you have any standing in this? So both Crowns, senior Crowns, said to me, no. The only thing they were concerned about is anytime you talk about your case publicly while your case goes through the system, that can be used as another quote unquote statement of, right? So that was the warning. And I reassured them, no, anything that's talked about, like what happened that night was already pre-recorded in 2019 when my story first broke, because I did a big piece with CBC, but it also was recorded for radio. So anything from that date, I don't talk about that night. I hadn't anywhere. It was just about the police process. So they again, no, okay, fine. See you later. Bye. So there's a court case coming up September 2nd. And again, this, I won't get into why, because there was so many twists and turns in my criminal case as well. And so the day before, reporter calls me, Maggie calls me to say, hey, you know, I'm over at CBC. They just got an email, a letter from the Nova Scotia Public Prosecution Office, you know, saying that they are aware that CBC is working with a podcast with Carrie Low, and we're writing to inform you there's a publication ban on her name, therefore you cannot publish. Okay, so if we were to publish this, we would all be charged. Furious. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to share with you my experience right after. I think that was the first time that I was like so livid. I called the Crown. I called her right away and I called her a snake. I called her a snake. I'm like, I was there. Afforded you, the opportunity for you to tell me that this publication ban, existed. Why didn't you? Anyway, I said, if you have the power to put that on my name, because it only affects, like, it's only protecting me. I don't want it. If you have the power to put it on, take it off. And her response was, well, there's processes. It doesn't work that way. And I'm like, well, what is that process? So at that time, that process was I had to hire a lawyer, get independent legal advice. Then I had to file a motion with the court to ask to have this publication ban lifted. And my lawyer had to go in and fight for the reasons why. Okay. It's so paternalistic, so backwards, make it make sense, right?
Mhm.
And so anyway, fast forward, I go into court. Thankfully, judge says yes, he'll lift the publication ban. But during that process, he did look to the defense and asked what their standing was. He, afforded, the accused who doesn't have a publication ban on their name at all. Asked if it was okay if I could. Again, why are you asking my accused rapist if I
Mhm.
and then asking the Crown, do you oppose or are you okay with this? At the end of the day, everyone agreed, and the judge said, okay, Carrie Low, your publication ban is lifted. And he was able to finally call me by my name, because if you have a publication ban on, they will not call you that name. They'll call you complainant. They won't
Mhm.
even call you a victim complainant. They just call you a complainant. So anyway, that led up to me lifting my publication ban so I could have this podcast released. So that same year, the rest of the survivors that were in this initiative, we all say 2021 was the year of publication ban removals. So there was a case. I'm going to just take a sip.
Yes, please do.
There was a survivor in Kitchener-Waterloo who had a publication ban on. And it became public because, again, she didn't know about it. And she had gone through the court process. It was her ex-husband, and he had perpetrated sexual violence against her. He was charged. He went through the court. He was found guilty. So naturally, like anybody would, like I would have done the same, I shared the decision with my immediate friends and family through email. Hey, like everyone knew who my husband, like ex-husband is.
Mhm.
So she had shared that through close family and friends. Somehow somebody in that network advised ex-husband that she shared this. He called the
Mm.
police. He called the police and he said, she just broke the law. She has a publication ban on and she can't do that. And this is where it's like wild to me that everybody in the system went through with all of these things. So the police charged her. They
Mhm.
charged her. She, then had to go to so then your case goes to a crown, right? Police charge, then it goes to a crown. Sometimes it's the other way around. I'm pretty sure Ontario is that way. Um, but here in Nova Scotia, police charge goes to the crown. The crown can then say, well, not enough evidence, we could drop it, or we're not going to, it's not in the public interest, right? To have this case go forward. Well, they chose to do that. They chose to take that case and they prosecuted her. And again, another like so many stops where this could have been stopped. Then she gets, a lawyer, and unfortunately didn't get great legal advice, because at the end of the day, they're like, you might as well just plead guilty, right? As
Mm.
most, low charges. Anyway, so she did. And she
Mm.
ended up having a victim surcharge. She had to pay her rapist money for
Just
breaking a
the,
public. Yeah. So
the
that story came out in the public. Uh, thanks to Robin Parker. Robin Parker and publicly ended up defending her, got that, overturned. And that really sparked Morel Andrews. So Morel Andrews had gone through the same thing. She was public about her story, didn't know a publication ban existed. So Morel and Kelly sort of were the immediate drivers of the publication ban stuff. So then my podcast came out, and then after my podcast came out, so it was October. So it was the following year, I guess, that Morel reached out and said, "Hey, I'm Morel. I'm doing this work. I heard your story. Would you like to talk?" And I said, "Yes, I want to be a part of this." So at the end of the day, there were, I think, seven of us victim complainants or survivors across Canada who had publication bans put on us without our knowing, didn't want them, and had challenges within that. So we had to advocate, not long, fortunately, but we did. Thousands of letters were written, a bill was drawn up, and what we didn't get all the changes we wanted. There's always room for improvement. But what the change now is that a judge can, if a Crown goes in and wants to put a publication ban on, the judge has to inquire of the Crown that they did every means possible to contact the survivor and get consent. Okay, so that's the first thing. So there's supposed to be information. So Crown is supposed to contact you. You have a case moving through. This is information. This is information about a publication ban. This is your choice. Do you want it or not? If they want it, they have to do it. So the only mandatory, and this is where I think previously, and still sometimes even after the charges, where sometimes these laws are interpreted in different ways. The law before it was mandatory for a judge to impose a publication ban, but the only mandatory part was if it's requested, they have to do it. He or she has to do it. But it was being interpreted that they were just automatic. So anyway, so we were advocating for change, that one, no victim complainant should ever be charged for breaching their own publication ban, ever. We advocated that, codify the process, make a streamlined process that if somebody does want to lift a publication ban, whenever in the process, that they can do that. And again, with interpretation of law, the only material evidence, I guess, that you needed to say or disclose why you wanted one is a material change. And that material change is, I don't want one. So there's no you've got to give evidence and argue and, all this kind of thing. So streamline that process. And then also, again, like I said, is make victims aware. And then, of course, with fighting with lawyers, we back and forth for so months, trying to get the wording right. There's a lot that goes into law and amending laws, But one of the things was that there are cases where maybe that victim is in the hospital and can't, there are certain circumstances, and in those cases, after they have afforded every effort to locate or talk to, they will put a publication ban on without their consent, but they are to notify them as soon as it's there. And if they want it lifted at any point, that Crown has to do it. They have to make the application and do it for them. So those are sort of the changes that were made. Again, like I said, there are circumstances where you may have multiple victims. Those are, complex cases where, if me and my sister are victims and I lift my publication ban, but she doesn't want hers, and we're victims in the same, it has to go. There has to be somewhat of a trial and sort of, balance that out with the judge. But, there are changes that can be made. I know it's a long process. Again, it's federal, downstream. So federals make the laws, and then it's like provincial courts apply them. And we have been slow in our provincial systems when it comes to any law change and implementing them in the processes too. So, yeah.
I just want to say, wow, just that
Oh, and I
changed
will
everything.
add, sorry, I will add one more
Go
thing.
ahead.
So this is important. So what was happening before as well, like I said, this person wasn't like quote unquote public. She didn't share it to the media. She didn't, she shared it within her circle. So before we were adamant about this, that even if you had a publication ban on, because ultimately, at the end of the day, again, another re-victimization is is especially all of us when we were going through these processes where, oh my God, this publication ban, like they can charge me. We've seen that now, like someone's been charged in the system. And that meant that ideal, like seriously, if I'm talking to my legal advocate and I'm talking and identifying about my case, that's a breach, right? If I'm talking to my therapist, that potentially could be a breach. So it's not, a lot of people just think, oh, it's in the media. No, like if I wrote on Facebook, I'm Carrie Low and this, I'm the victim of this case. And if I public like I could be charged. So we really wanted to make sure that there were stipulations in that. So right now, it does exist. If I have a publication ban on today, the media, nobody else can publicly identify me and tie me to that case and transmit anything. So that's not just media. That's through email, through phone call, through any means of communication. But I can share my story. I can share it with my therapist. I can share it with my trusted people without having that looming over me that, oh my gosh, I may be charged one day. And also, they can talk about it publicly. The only time where it can be difficult is, again, if it's a harmful thing to the public, good, and it's done in some frivolous, malicious way kind of thing. But otherwise, we were happy. We did not want to see another victim complainant be charged in this manner. Like, make it make sense, people. Right? Again, where the system is so backwards that, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna make a joke of like it's so appalling. Where are the checks and balances in place during this? Like it's just a little bit, it's just
You know what?
absurd.
I'm going to say this because I think for me, one of the things is like, I always want to be truthful. I always want to share my experiences because I always want to be able to connect with somebody out there. If someone can hear my story and they can connect with that. And what I wanted to share with you is that, you know, uh, and I've challenged, like I've had this challenge as an advocate where, women are coming to me and like, oh, I want a publication ban lift. And, you know, that should I do it? Should I do it? And like, it's as an advocate, you never like, you can't give legal advice. We can
Hmm.
only share information and we can never, ever like the choice is on you. But I'll say this. So I was very adamant. Like I said, I was public from day one before charges. And then I lifted the publication ban so I could be even more public. Again, it wasn't about exposing my perpetrator. It was about exposing the system and wanting to be able to talk about that. And I will tell you this, the day that I went for the criminal trial, second criminal trial, uh, I remember like 3 days before it started, like anxiety producing even the night before. And I was like so anxious. And I literally in that moment was like, why did I get a publication ban lifted? Because you don't know what's going to be, said in court. You don't know what's going to be, disclosed about you. And again, sometimes that can be another level of harm. So that was one of those, oh my God, did I do the right thing? Um, so I want to share that because I think, I do agree that we should have, some type of independent legal advice or someone to really like think about this, to have this lifted because just like once it gets on you, it's there for life and until death, by the way, right? Like it stays on you even if you pass, your family members can't lift it. It is once you lift it, it's gone for good as well. So there's a lot of things to consider. And we all don't always know, what those
Hmm.
outcomes are going to, lead to. Um, but I think it was just, it's anxiety producing already to go in and have to testify, to the most intimate, private trauma that one can ever go through. So yeah, I laugh about it now because it was like I was this big like tell
Mhm.
it all, and then when it came time, it was like, oh, did I do the right thing? But at the end of the day, I did because one thing of advice I give everyone is just always stay in your truth. I know it's
Mhm.
easier said than done, but it's like when you stay in your truth, it's the truth, and no one can take that from you. So yeah, I always laugh about that now, and I say like if you're considering a publication ban,
Mhm.
look at all avenues before you make that decision. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. I really appreciate
And
you
I
really
support
diving in.
them, and I support them, right?
Yeah.
Like I support people. They're a really good tool to have, especially that people want to protect their identity, and I support survivors in that. So I want to put a plug out there as well that it's not like get rid of them all.
Yeah.
We as survivors going through the system, I think we all can appreciate as we're coming out and getting into this work is that we just want it to be better. Like, I think that is a common theme that, like, those of us that who have gone public, or those of us that have spoken, or those that are advocating, or even taking the activist route is you'll ask, why? Why did you report? Right? I think like the number one reason is I didn't want it to happen to someone else. So I think that's where, that stems from. And I think again, if I could put one more plug in, is that, the system was built way before women were even humans, right? The system wasn't built for humans. It was built on property, and the system hasn't caught up with that. And it's unfortunate. And I think we need to start thinking about other ways, um, you know, other than the criminal justice system when it comes time to sexual violence. So again, for choice, I think we should have multiple choices because not every way is going to be um, what somebody wants. So yeah, I do want to throw that out there.
Yes, thank you so much. I think getting more information out there and having people know before they make a decision is so valuable, especially having conversations. It's been very much like it's a very pervasive issue going to the legal system, and having an actual example being brought to in this discussion today has really
Yeah,
opened up my lens. It's like, you should know everything going in, and you should have a choice, especially when it comes to having a publication ban or not, because there's pros to and cons for either
yeah.
option.
Yeah. And I will say this, and I don't think I was able to highlight as much as I wanted to, but Bill S 236 is again had its first reading October 2025. Has multiple readings yet to go through, but this is an important one, and I think if it does reach out to any of the audience members today about the Victim Bill of Rights, is to call your MP and push for this bill, because what this bill will do is make really substantial changes where it will be like mandatory and automatic that you are given information. You don't have to request it. So I think, you can look up that bill on the Parliament website. I can share resources with you later if you want, but and you can follow the bills. You can see what's happening, and I think it's important for us as a society to be, well aware, because I think sometimes I even think I've said this, from day one before this happened to me. I felt like I was a 41-year-old woman with my head in the sand, right? I worked in the male dom. I didn't really realize what was going on in society. And I think all too well we get in that complacency of like, well, it didn't happen to me, or it's not going to happen to me until it does.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we can all do as community members is we need to start coming together as a society, and helping each other out, because we can look at the statistics, and it may happen to you one day, right? So yeah.
Mhm. Definitely. Before I shift gears, are you still good on to discuss a little bit further? I'm just looking at the
Yeah.
time and being cognizant.
I know.
Okay.
I'm like, are you ready to kick me off yet? Because I'm talking too much.
No, I have a meeting in an hour, so we still got some time with just you
Okay.
and I, but I wanted to be cognizant of your time. So I just wanted to
Yeah,
double check
no,
before.
I love it. This is my favorite part. It's always been my favorite part is the question. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I just really want to dive into the change from like a survivor center so to survivor-led programming
Mm,
and like such as survivors. You mentioned like survivors helping define priorities, shaping and influence a system that it impacts their lives. And because, as you mentioned, they are the experts of their own lived experience and they should be
yeah,
in every room when it comes to policy, teaching,
that's right.
educating. And so you've built Survivors for Change and Empowerment and the My Voice, My Choice campaign, largely from the ground up, like grassroots. So when you think about building these survivor-led programs and initiatives that
So glad you
last,
asked me this.
what are these items that make them work? And what do
Yeah.
you learn about how to create something that can change the system? Sorry, lots of questions, lots of answers,
No,
but
and I am so glad because it's like I've been waiting for like this moment to talk about this is okay, so the difference between survivor centered, to give your audience some knowledge. So survivor centered is, whether it's a system, an organization, a policy, whatever, is that they're centering survivors as a whole, right? They're centering survivors and they're trying to think what they want, right? By putting the survivor at the center. Survivor led sort of changes that from putting the power back into the survivor. So having survivor led systems and policies is about putting the survivor in as the expert, having them at the policy table. So not just coming in and being consultants, sitting on advisory boards, just doing surveys, sitting in focus groups, is having them as the experts. And I've said this multiple times when I've been up against, in my advocacy, gender-based violence world, and talking to politicians, yeah, I'm not a policy expert on paper, but I am your expert. And so are all the other survivors in our province. And we need to have them at the table. We have to have them. We need to be at those tables because we've experienced it. We know what it's like. And we are seeing the challenges and the faults that other people aren't going to see, right? Yes, we do have like great organizations that work with survivors. They have, experience because they're working with multiple survivors. But at the end of the day, we need to be at those tables, right? Um, and whether that's at some point in that policy making, and I always said, you know what, you have your experts, sure, you got to have the education and be a policy expert. But why aren't we in that? Why are we not even like included in the like after you've made the policy? Why are we not included? Is this going to work? So that's what I mean when I say survivor led, like my voice, my choice. That was a complete initiative. Um, we were a bunch of victim complainants across Canada, no money in our pocket. We did some crowdfunding, I think our second round to Ottawa, but that was all of our own pocket. We had no finance, no support. Uh, Survivors for Change and Empowerment, same thing. Again, it was something I wanted to give back. I did not want another survivor to go through the system with no knowledge. Uh, because of re-traumatization, because of these things that can manifest. And not only that, not being able to have the time to heal, that is
Mhm.
so important. And just sort of taking that weight off a survivor. Again, I know we've heard budget like funding, budget cuts, all of these budget cuts over the last number of years. But I was able to get some funding when I first started. And we are like right now we had no funding for the last 2 years, but I do have other survivors that volunteer the time. So we're volunteering our time, to try to keep up with social media, to try to get resources out there. We're still showing up in spaces. We're showing up at our budgets for the police. We're showing up on these, advocacy boards and whatnot. None of this is paid work,
Yeah.
And I think what I want to add to that is it eventually can be another harm. Is one, if you're going to be survivor led, is you need to like make sure that survivor has support. There needs to be holistic support with that survivor. Far too often, like I mentioned about being trauma informed, it's this buzzword. Oh, we're trauma informed, or oh, you know, we hear a lot about this. Those who have gone public is like your case is in the thing, and like, oh, you've got all of this support and these organizations around you, whatever. Well, once your story's gone, it's like, no, where is everyone? Everyone's gone, right? So it's not a sustained support that sort of happens. And the other part and I always advocate for this now, but in the past, when I first started coming public, I had multiple, nonprofit organizations really fascinated by my story, wanting me to come to speak, but didn't want to pay, wanted me to do it for free. And I will advocate that, like, I won't do it anymore for free. Um, because it's a lot. Like this can be re-traumatizing. I didn't get into a lot of my story because I knew I'm activated. I'm triggered, activated these last 2 weeks. I have my civil case is moving through the courts this week. So when I talk about survivor led, it's you know are you having them at the table? Is your organization, whatever it may be, when you say that you're survivor led, do you have them at the table? And not just like having them in mind when you're making these things out, because again, like I said, we're the experts. But again, another harm that we get is, oh well, we're broken. We're broken, and we shouldn't be in these spaces because we're still healing. I've heard that multiple times in the gender-based advocacy world. Is especially my case. I mean, I'm still 8 years and still going through one last process, and it's like, you know not having that support. There is stigma around survivors. I've heard other frontline workers who are like, I've been a survivor, but I will not disclose it because it's well known that then you're labeled difficult or harmed, fragile, broken. We can be, when we hear those things and we're excluded. Again, being re-victimized by that. That's a re-victimization. That's that to me, right? Like I know I don't have all the answers, but I think I have some. And to be excluded from spaces because I'm a survivor, I think is harmful. So again, having those survivor-led spaces, but also being able to support that survivor. So again, I advocate for any survivor doing this work in all organizations. If you're going to reach out to a survivor, you need to compensate them, right? Because a lot of the times we like, what I've experienced through all of these harms, I know right now, there's no way I can ever work full time. I could never go back to a normal job. I experience, a lot of different manifestations of symptoms over the years, and still to this day. And with that, when we do this work, we're doing it on, bits and here and there, that kind of thing. There's no real substantial funding. A lot of the times as survivors, we can go work for a nonprofit, but we're a contractor. So we don't have benefits. We don't have medical. We don't have anything. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So I always advocate that if you're going to be survivor led, do it, but do it and make sure that they're being funded, they're being compensated, that they're being supported, right? That's how you're able to sustain it long term, because I've had to walk away from a lot of things because it wasn't sustainable, right? So that's how you do that. And it's just reality. Like you get into working with other survivors and we're all at different levels in our healing, and it's not linear. Healing's not linear. So I think first and foremost, I always say to anyone who comes forward, I still have people coming to me, I've experienced harm, I want to go public, please help me, is one, do you have a support system? You really need to have a support system, hopefully, a therapist of some nature, support in family, friends. You need community to do this work because it is so isolating. And not only is it isolating, it became my whole life. Therefore, I then manifested that I can't be around anybody because all it is my case. For 5 years, that's all I was living, eating, and breathing, and that's all I could talk about. So I was the party pooper, and then that just sort of created my own isolation. Like I stopped being social. I stopped hanging out with my support and my friends because who wants to hear Carrie still talk? So
Mhm.
again, I think it's really important that survivors are supported because we have value. And when you have a survivor that is supported, wow, that brings power. That brings, for me, justice. That's taken our power back. And for me, that's justice. It's giving it back and to be able to be at my best to support other people. So there's beautiful and wonderful things that come out of that. And it's also peer one, like working with another survivor. There's like, I get goosebumps still talking about it because it's a connection and a level that it's just beautiful, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, so there's a lot of good in this work. But we need to be supported and get rid of all
Mhm.
the assumptions that we're all like, oh, because I'm public, like, oh no,
Yeah.
I didn't make any money. Right? So yeah, it's yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much
Giving
about.
survivors that power back. We're the experts. I can't say it enough. We are the experts. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much about the power and justice that comes back to survivors when they believe they're full, like they can live life to full potential when they're given the resources and the community around them to back them. And I think that's just such an important statement. To go
Yeah.
on a little bit of a tangent, I had a lovely conversation last week with Dr. Yvonne Simpson and Dr. Stephanie Hunt Kennedy. They're at University of New Brunswick at the Muriel McBean Ferguson Center, and they really focus on the intersections between gender-based violence and disability. And we were talking about having disabled folks as experts in disability and how when they are actively not included in policymaking, that could be in universities for having for accommodations, it could be from all the way up to what for disabilities. If they are not actively in that room, that is the first step of ableism. That is the first step
Yeah.
of harm, again, to disabled folks when they are not treated as experts in these conversations that they're being had without them. So I think that all just like comes back to this conversation of like survivor led is putting the survivors as the experts and not expecting them just to be consultants in their own lived experience. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for really reiterating
Yeah.
that point
Thank
again
you.
for me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I see it all too often, like, especially lately in all these, changes to the criminal justice system. And, I'm watching it going, oh, some of these are a little, can harm survivors in some way. So yeah, I think that's so important. And you're right. Like, you know, we know the statistics, right? But we also know the statistics on who gets to move through the system, and not that many even get to the system even after they
Mhm.
report it, right? And most don't even report. And I get it, I understand. And that again, that's a choice, and that's a powerful choice, and that is a good choice. Like, you know, um, but it's that again, it's watching these small changes. I always call them like little small changes. I remember my lawyer at one point because I remember my case was one of those that moved the police complaints process here. So it was my case that was ongoing in the court, like being public, as well as the street checks, the Wortley report. So with that combined, they changed the police complaint process from 6 months to a year. But it was also my advocacy work in that needs to be extended because sometimes like we don't know in the first 6 months or a year, like we're still like trying to even just get to baseline again from what just happened.
Mhm.
So there is movement in that. And I remember saying, like it always like, oh, you help change a law. I mean, and then, pub bans as well. And it's like, yeah, but that's not enough. That's not enough. Um, and I think I still have, you know, uh, goals in mind. And I think this sort of like goes with this theme is like, victims have no duty of care in these systems, right? So harmful in so many ways. And I won't go down that rabbit hole, but my point is, you know, is things move slow, right? Like
Hmm.
Victim Bill of Rights, 10 years. And we're just finding out that like it's not good,
Hmm.
and again, it's all this work that is being put into it, and still can't make movement on changes. It's frustrating. I think for myself, I think it can be one of those challenges in doing this work because you can get beat down so much. Like I said the other day, I turned and looked at my daughter and I just was like, 8 years. It's almost been a decade. I'm adding a couple years, but it's like, to me, it's like a what? Where did eight
Hmm.
years go? But then also at the same time, it's been 8 years. Like, whoa. And I'm a baby. I always call myself a baby in the advocacy world. Like we have women, wonderful, badass women who have been doing this work for decades, 20, 30, 40
Hmm.
years. So, and yeah, I think that's a challenge too. And I think again, all kinds of politics and bureaucratic things about that, but I think we need to see more change, and I think we need to see more movement in that. And I think survivors are the ones that are going to make that difference. They just got to start like bringing us to those tables. Like we will move that needle faster. And I think, look at My Voice, My Choice, like grassroots, all survivor led. It was commented on us actually when we were in Ottawa, um, how quickly, we were able to get that. I would love to see that momentum again happen. Um, survivors, advocating and pushing for changes in policies, um, you know, and supported
Hmm.
by others, as well. So I think that's where the movement lies. But again, we're in this society, this crazy world right now, and you know, like life is hard, as it is. But yeah,
Hmm.
again, that's why it's like get these survivor-led spaces, and it can be healing and empowering, and like that's where some of us find our work and
Hmm.
find that justice. I will never have justice, for what happened to me, um, from the harms done to me in that way. Still trying out other ways, but um, it's something that I can give back and I can contribute to, and I think it's really important for those of us who want to do that, um, and give us space to do that. Give us space to talk about the real crappy stuff, right? Like this was
Hmm.
crazy and harmful, and like, but let's talk about it, right? Because it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, it's all big in the news, and then everyone goes away and forgets. Well, we don't forget,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I think as a society, by nature, we've done that, right? Like we get complacent. So yeah, it's spaces like this where we're grateful that we can come and keep having these discussions and keep talking about it and get people to listen to our stories, hear what's going on, because all far too often I'll talk about it till I'm blue in the face. The system will,
Hmm.
put a rosy, look at us, we're doing good.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a few hiccups, but overall. But you know what? Because you're not bringing us to the table to tell you. You're
Hmm.
not including us, right? We're the one-offs. We are not one-offs. You have no idea how many people I've met who have a story like mine, right? We are not one-offs. It is a pattern in this system. Yeah.
Hmm.
So thank you so much. I know I ramble, but so
I
important
would
to talk about this stuff.
I wanted to thank you for being a mover and a shaker and like
Thank you.
having the time to discuss your lived experience and like how it is from like building like all your like grassroots like and
Yeah.
vendors going forward. I really do appreciate it.
Can I say one more thing though, now that you
Yes,
say that? Because I
absolutely.
think this is, I know I keep thinking about things that are important, and anyone doing this work, that it's okay to take a break, right? It's okay at times to take, it can be too much to be able to be like, I'm going to take a few months and do some self-care, like not, be in this system because it can, and I think you can come back, right? So I always want to put a plug in there because I feel like for so long I got stuck in the I gotta keep going, I gotta keep going, I gotta keep going, and like, oh, wait now. it's too much, right? We're
Mhm.
human. So again, like, yeah, survivor led, and having that space when they need to step out, but keeping the door open for when they need to come back, right? I think that's important. And I think there's a lot of great work going on right now in research. Like, I am so impressed with the research that's happening now, in our country, especially in my province. The Violence Against Women Project with Dr. Yokupovich down here is just, phenomenal, and looking at systems like, and I keep going to these other spaces too, where, you know, it's just amazing to see the research that's going into this, and this needs to come together. And like, if you've been in this work long enough, most of us radical feminists, I call us, want that matriarchy where it's like we're a community and we're working together. And I think that's also important. It's not just one person, it takes a community to move this work, right? And you got to go in there with that. You have to go in there that this isn't about you. It's knowing that your story can help advance in some way, but it's not about you, because it'll never change for me. I'll never get back anything, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, so yeah, those are my tidbits.
Thank you for the important caveat. I really appreciate it. I think everyone, it's like, yes, keep going, fight, keep on fighting justice all the time. And then it's like, oh, you should take care of your mental health and take breaks
Yeah,
when needed. So that's always a really important thing to discuss as well, is that a
yeah,
lot of people, I think, in this work do it because they want to see changes in systems that are so built on inequity and just systemic disparages. So, but it's a constant battle. But it is important to take care of ourselves and the people we love during this.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you
And
so
then
much. Oh,
my
final question.
final question, because I really do love, what do you want people to know about? So for the advocates, the
Oh,
educators, the community members listening today, what is one thing you want them to do differently after this conversation?
oh my God, I can't pick one. I don't know. Like, I think I can't hone on this enough. Again, I think for me, it's that complacency. And I know there are times, like, I've had times I have to step out. I know what's going on, but I gotta take a break. I'm not complacent in it, but with all the harms that are going on in this world, it can be so compounding. But I think for me, it's like, again, having those survivors at that driver's seat, supporting them, but also contributing to it. Like we need you to contribute. Like, we need you to, if you can, like, you are still a citizen of this, call your MP, try and push that bill. You know, get your group friends together, do a little fundraising drive, and maybe, donate that money to a nonprofit, or maybe a survivor who's struggling. Um, I think there's a lot of work that can be done in community that are small things. I was talking about the small things. I had to start going back and being like, oh, those were really important things that I did. And now they're my big things. So I think those little things are super helpful, especially, like I just said, in a system where things are moving like molasses and slow,
Mhm.
and it can be compounding. So being able to do those little things that you can, um, you know, it is really helpful. And the research, like, I'd like to see more research on the criminal justice system. I don't think there's enough of research in that. I know there's movement in other systems that hopefully can help move other systems, but I would really like to see more work in Canada specific, to our legal system, to our policing system, and how things are happening. Because I think that, again, right, hopefully will help advance change. Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. Beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining me today,
Thank
Carrie. I
you.
truly appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the HerHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk. Remember, your health matters, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. For more resources and support on issues affecting girls, women, and gender-diverse people, visit our website at avatraining.ca. This is Dr. Nicole Letourneau. Thank you for listening.